There's a crow sitting on the telephone wire outside your window right now. Or there was one this morning. Or there will be one tomorrow. You've probably seen it without really seeing it, that dark shape against the sky, motionless for a few seconds, then gone. You didn't think much about it. Why would you? It's just a bird. But here's the thing that will quietly rearrange something inside your mind by the time this video ends. That crow may already know your face. It may have known it for months. And depending on how you behave around its kind, it has already made a decision about you, one that it has shared with others, including crows you have never once been close enough to notice. You weren't the one doing the observing. You never were. If you've ever been curious about the hidden intelligence of the natural world, the kind that operates just outside the edge of human attention, make sure you subscribe to this channel. We put out videos like this every week, and each one is built around a single question. What's actually happening out there that we're not seeing? Drop a comment below telling us, have you ever had a strange encounter with a crow? Something that felt like it meant something. You'd be surprised how many people have. No. Back to the wire. Back to the bird that knows your face. Crows belong to a family of birds called corvids, which also includes ravens, jays, magpies, and rooks. And within that family, crows occupy a particular kind of status, not the largest, not the most visually striking, but consistently, across study after study, among the most cognitively complex animals on the planet. Not complex for a bird. Complex, period. Their brains, relative to body size, rival those of great apes in several measurable ways. The prefrontal cortex equivalent in corvid brains, the region associated with planning, decision-making, and social behavior, is proportionally enormous. Neuroscientists have spent years trying to figure out exactly what that means. They're still working on it. But the behavioral evidence doesn't wait for neuroscience to catch up. It's already out there, observable, documented, and in some cases profoundly strange. Start with the basics. Crows use tools. Not in a metaphorical sense, not occasionally, not by accident, deliberately, with clear purpose, and sometimes with what appears to be planning ahead. New Caledonian crows, a species found in the Pacific, have been documented crafting hooks from plant material to extract insects from narrow crevices. They carry their tools from one location to another. They modify the tools when they don't work correctly the first time. In controlled laboratory settings, crows have solved multi-step puzzles, problems that require them to use one tool to obtain another tool before they could access the actual reward. The number of steps involved in some of these solutions has startled researchers who designed the experiments. A few of them have admitted in published papers that they didn't expect the crows to get that far. But tool use, impressive as it is, isn't what makes crows unusual in relation to humans. Lots of animals use tools in various ways. What makes crows genuinely different, what puts them in a category that very few species share, is the nature of their social intelligence. Specifically, the way they perceive, remember, and communicate information about individual people. This is where the story gets uncomfortable. In the best possible way. In the mid-2000s, a researcher at the University of Washington named John Marsluff began conducting a series of experiments that would eventually reshape how scientists think about human-animal social cognition. The initial setup was simple, almost crude. Researchers would trap crows on campus while wearing rubber caveman masks. The masks served as a consistent, recognizable face, a face that crows could associate specifically with the experience of being captured and handled. After the trapping events, researchers continued walking through the same areas. Sometimes they wore the caveman mask. Sometimes they wore neutral masks or no mask at all. What happened next is the part that Marsluff has described as genuinely surprising, even to someone who had spent years studying corvid behavior. The crows remembered the mask. Not just for a few days, for years. When someone wore the caveman mask on campus, crows would begin scolding. They would follow the masked person, dive toward them, call aggressively, and alert other crows in the area. Crows that had never been trapped, birds that were nowhere near the original capture events, began responding the same way. The information had moved through the population. A face had been flagged, and the flag had spread. In one particularly striking follow-up, a researcher wore the dangerous mask while walking a specific route. Crows that were perched far from the path, that had no direct experience with a mask, came closer to investigate and join in the scolding. The transmission of the threat assessment was happening in real time, bird to bird, across the flock. What you're looking at when you step back from the details is a functional reputation system. Not instinct. Not simple conditioning. A socially transmitted evaluation of a specific individual human face, spreading through a community of birds the way information spreads through a human neighborhood. And if you're wondering whether this only applies to threats, whether crows only bother to share information about danger, the answer is no. It works in the other direction, too. Crows remember kindness. They remember it with the same precision, the same duration, the same willingness to communicate it to others. People who feed crows regularly report that the birds begin to recognize them, to approach them with less hesitation, sometimes to bring small objects, bottle caps, pieces of foil, smooth stones, and leave them near where the person stands. Researchers debate exactly what this behavior means. Some interpret it as accidental. Others, including some corvid specialists, are less certain that accidental covers it adequately. The point is not that crows are grateful in the way humans are grateful. The point is that they track individual humans across time, update their assessments based on new information, and communicate those assessments to others. That's a social cognitive architecture that most animals simply don't have. Now, if what you just heard made something shift in the way you're thinking about the birds you pass every day, you're going to want to go deeper. There's a full program called The Secret Language of Crows that goes far beyond what any single video can cover. It's built around the actual research, the field observations, the communication systems scientists have spent decades trying to decode. It compiles everything into one place: the vocalizations, the social hierarchies, the documented interactions between crows and specific humans over years and even decades. The link is in the first comment below, or if you're watching on TV, point your phone camera at the QR code on screen right now. Keep watching, because what comes next is the part that most people find hardest to believe. Let's talk about what crows actually say to each other. Because they say quite a lot. Crow vocalizations are not a simple alarm system. They are not the avian equivalent of a car horn. Researchers have identified dozens of distinct call types in American crows alone, and the functional distinctions between them are increasingly well documented. There are calls that appear to convey the nature of a threat. Aerial predators versus ground predators produce different responses in the listening birds. There are calls that function as assembly signals, drawing other crows toward a location. There are quieter, more intimate vocalizations used between mated pairs and between parents and offspring that differ structurally from the public calls. And then there are the calls associated with mobbing. Mobbing is what crows do when they identify something or someone as a threat. They gather. They call loudly and repeatedly. They may make short, aggressive flights toward the target. And crucially, they recruit. A single crow beginning to mob will, within minutes, draw other crows from surprising distances. The call that initiates this recruitment is distinctive enough that researchers can reliably distinguish it from other crow vocalizations. It is, in a functional sense, a call that means, "Come here, there is something worth being concerned about, and I want witnesses." What Marsluff's research revealed, and what subsequent studies have continued to support, is that this recruiting call, combined with the visual information about the specific face being mobbed, creates a transfer of threat information between individuals. A crow that has never seen your face before can, within a single mobbing event, learn to associate your face with the concept of danger. It encodes that association. It retains it. For how long? That's the part that sits with you. In one of the Washington studies, threat responses to the dangerous mask were still being recorded more than 2.5 years after the original capture events. The population of crows on campus had turned over significantly in that time. Birds had died, new birds had arrived, young crows had been born and grown. And yet the response persisted because it was being continuously transmitted to new members of the group. The original information had been absorbed into the community's collective knowledge. It no longer required the original witnesses to survive. This is something qualitatively different from simple animal memory. What you're looking at is a form of cultural transmission, the passing of learned information from one individual to another, across time, across generations, through a medium that isn't genetic. It's behavioral. It's social. It is, in the most careful use of the word, a kind of culture. Humans tend to think of culture as something we invented. Language, tradition, the accumulated knowledge of generations passed down through stories and tools and institutions. We treat these as defining features of our species, things that separate us from the rest of the animal world. And in terms of complexity and scale, that's not wrong. But in terms of the underlying mechanism, crows are doing something recognizably similar. Smaller, simpler, but recognizably the same kind of thing. A young crow growing up in a neighborhood where a particular person has been flagged as dangerous will learn to treat that person as dangerous, not because it was there when the original judgment was formed, but because the community it was born into already held that judgment. It inherits a social reality that preceded its own experience. That's not instinct. That's not reflex. That is, in a very precise sense, learned culture. And here's where it gets stranger still. Researchers studying crow social behavior have observed that the transmission of individual-specific information doesn't just happen through direct vocalization. It also happens through observation of other crows' behavior. A young crow that watches older members of its group respond with alarm or avoidance to a particular person will update its own behavior accordingly, even without hearing a specific warning call. It reads the social response of its community and calibrates its own responses to match. This is called social learning, and in most species it's relatively limited in scope. In corvids, it appears to be remarkably broad and flexible. What this means in practice is that a crow's assessment of you isn't just based on what you've done around crows. It's based on what the crows around you have learned from each other over time, possibly before you were even living in the neighborhood. Your reputation, if we want to use that word carefully, may have preceded you in ways you have no way of knowing. Think about your own street for a moment. The crows that nest in your area have been watching the humans who live there for years. They know which houses have dogs that chase them. They know which yards regularly have food scraps. They know which people stop and look up, and which people walk past without noticing anything above eye level. They have a working model of the social landscape they inhabit, and that model includes specific human individuals, updated continuously, stored collectively. You are in that model. You have been for a while. We're going to pause here for a moment because this is a good place to ask yourself something. Has a crow ever seemed to react to you specifically, not just alarm at a general disturbance, but something more targeted? Has one ever followed you for half a block, or called when you walked past in a way that felt different from the baseline noise of birds? Most people, when they think back carefully, have at least one story like this. And most people dismissed it at the time because the idea that a bird was tracking them specifically felt too strange to take seriously. It still feels strange, but strange and untrue are not the same thing. If this is the kind of material that makes you look at the world differently, and we think it is since you're still here, subscribe to this channel and hit the like button. It genuinely helps us keep making videos like this one. And leave a comment. What's the most intelligent animal behavior you've ever personally witnessed? We read every single one. Now let's take this one layer deeper. Because so far, everything we've discussed has been about memory and communication, crows remembering faces, crows sharing that information. But there's another dimension to corvid social intelligence that researchers have been investigating for the past 2 decades, and it touches on something that's harder to categorize cleanly. Crows appear to understand, at some level, that other individuals have minds. This is called theory of mind, and it's a cognitive capacity that was long considered uniquely or nearly uniquely human. The idea is simple but profound: the ability to model what another individual knows, believes, or intends, to understand that other minds exist and that they contain information different from your own. A human with theory of mind knows that if you hide a toy while someone is out of the room, that person won't know where the toy is when they return. It seems obvious to us, but it requires a specific cognitive architecture that not all animals possess. In corvids, the evidence for something like theory of mind has been building for years. One of the most compelling demonstrations involves food caching. Crows and ravens regularly hide food, burying it, tucking it under bark, concealing it in crevices for later retrieval. and they are extraordinarily good at remembering where they've hidden things. But what researchers discovered is that this behavior changes significantly depending on whether other birds are watching. A crow that has been observed hiding food will, if given the opportunity, return later and move the cache to a new location. It appears to understand that the watching bird knows where the food is and takes action based on that knowledge. More remarkably, this behavior is most pronounced in crows that have themselves stolen food from others. Birds with experience as thieves are more likely to assume they're being watched, more likely to take evasive action, more likely to behave as though other minds contain information that constitutes a threat. That is not simple behavior. That is modeling the contents of another individual's mind and acting strategically based on that model. It is, in everything but name, what we call perspective taking. And if crows can model what another crow knows, if they can reason about the contents of other minds, then there is no particular reason why that capacity should be limited to interactions with other crows. The same cognitive tool that allows a crow to think that bird saw me hide this food can be applied to that human has seen me before and remembers what I did. The distinction from a cognitive architecture standpoint may not be very large. This is why the face recognition research hits differently once you understand the theory of mind dimension. Crows aren't just passively recording visual information about humans. There's increasing reason to believe they're actively reasoning about what humans know, what humans intend, and what humans are likely to do next. They're building predictive models of individual human behavior and updating those models based on new observations, which means the crow on your telephone wire this morning wasn't just sitting there. It was, in whatever way a crow brain processes the world, thinking about you specifically, updating something, filing something away. This is where the secret language of crows becomes essential for anyone who wants to go beyond the surface of this subject. The program goes into the specific vocalizations that researchers have linked to individual human recognition, the calls that appear to transmit not just threat information but identity information, the behavioral signatures that suggest a crow is actively communicating something about a specific person rather than a general situation. It covers the documented cases of crows maintaining multi-year behavioral records of individual humans, not just as a phenomenon, but as a decoded process. The link is pinned in the first comment, and there's a QR code on screen for anyone watching on TV. What's in that program goes considerably further than what fits in a single video. Back to the birds. Let's talk about funerals. Because crows have them, and that sentence alone should stop you for a second. When a crow dies, other crows gather. This has been documented extensively in wild populations and studied carefully in controlled conditions. The gathering isn't random or incidental. It's a consistent behavioral response to the presence of a dead crow, and it has specific characteristics that distinguish it from other crow aggregations. The birds approach the body. They call. They sometimes stand near it for extended periods without doing much else. And then they leave. For a long time, researchers assumed this was simply a response to a novel, potentially dangerous stimulus. A dead bird might signal a predator in the area, and gathering to assess the threat would be adaptive. That explanation isn't wrong. But Marzluff and his colleagues, who studied this behavior in detail, found evidence that it's doing more than that. When they placed a dead crow near a food source that the local crow population regularly used, the crows began avoiding that food source. Not temporarily, for weeks. The association between the location and the dead crow persisted well past the point where any predator threat would have remained relevant. And when they combined a dead crow with a specific human face, a person in a particular mask standing near the body, that face became associated with danger and was treated as a threat in subsequent encounters. The crow funeral, it appears, serves at least two functions simultaneously: predator assessment behavior and a social learning event. The gathering crows don't just check whether it's safe to leave. They gather information about the context of the death, including, apparently, the identity of any humans present. They extract a lesson from what happened to one of their own, and they carry that lesson forward. There is something in this that is difficult to describe without reaching for language that feels too large. The crows that gather around their dead are not grieving in the way we grieve. We shouldn't project our emotional architecture onto theirs. But they are doing something that serves a function similar to what human funerary practices serve. They are processing a death collectively, extracting information from it, and using that information to update the community's model of the world. That is not nothing. That is a great deal. And it connects back to everything we've discussed because it reveals the same underlying architecture operating across different contexts. Crows are social information processors. They track individuals, both crow individuals and human individuals, across time. They transmit what they learn. They update their collective model of the world based on new events. They teach their young, not through instinct alone, but through demonstrated behavior and social learning. The crow that will sit on your wire tomorrow morning has been shaped by the accumulated experience of every crow that has watched the humans in your neighborhood before it. Some of those crows are still alive. Some of them are gone. But what they learned didn't disappear when they did. It became part of the community's working knowledge of the world, passed from bird to bird through a combination of direct communication and behavioral modeling, refined over time, updated continuously. Your neighborhood has a crow community with a history. And you are a character in that history, whether you know it or not. That's the thing that's hardest to shake once you've actually absorbed what the research is showing. It's not just that crows are intelligent. It's that their intelligence is specifically oriented toward the social world, toward tracking relationships, remembering individuals, transmitting information, building collective knowledge. It's the same orientation that makes human intelligence distinctive. The same direction, a different scale. And the unsettling implication, the one that takes a few days to fully arrive, is that the natural world has been watching us with this kind of attention for far longer than we've been watching it. We've built science and field research and behavioral studies to start paying attention. The crows didn't need any of that. They were already paying attention. They were already taking notes. Next time you pass a crow, a wire, on a fence, on the edge of a parking lot, take a moment to actually look at it. Not as scenery, as an individual. Because there is a reasonable chance that it is looking back at you in exactly the same way. And depending on what the crows in your area have decided about you, that gaze carries either something like recognition, something like wariness, or something like accumulated memory stretching back further than either of you can fully trace. You have a reputation among the crows. You've had one for years. The only question that remains is, what does it say?